Hello, welcome. Today we're going to talk about the evolution of special education in the public school. When we think about special education, we're thinking about those individualized education planned for students with special needs to be able to access their academic goals. Special education is offered to families at no cost, and this also includes related services. While education may not be a fundamental right under the Constitution, all citizens within the United States had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet it also protected that when states established schools, public school systems, that no child living in that state may be denied equal access to schooling. Yet, students with special needs have been struggling over the years to access services, to be a part, to be included in the education system. They have fought for years, such as Watson versus the City of Cambridge in 1893, where the court ruled that children with special needs, they had weak minds and could not benefit from instructions. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, it was ruled separate but equal. Betty versus the Board of Education in 1990, school had the right to exclude students with disability. In 1934, you have the Cuyahoga County Court of Appeals that ruled schools had the right to exclude any student between the ages of 6 to 18. And then in 1958, you had the Department of Public Welfare versus Hess that says, though compulsory education was for all, schools had the right, and they didn't have to provide free, appropriate public education for students with special needs. Yet, it was the Board of Education, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, the Black Civil Rights Movement that began that change, not only for Native American education, but even for special education. The court found that Plessy versus Ferguson that said equal, separate but equal, was unconstitutional. And so this was overturned. In 1958, Education for the Mentally Retarded Act was passed, and this provided funding for teachers to be trained to be able to teach students. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was funded by the federal government, providing funds for states to educate low-income students and special education students. In 1954, the Education for the Handicapped Act was passed, and a grant was handed and passed on for children with special needs that they'll be access higher education and also resources. In the 1971, you had the Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Children versus Pennsylvania, and students with disabilities cannot be excluded from a free public education ruled by the court. In Mills versus the Board of Education, District of Columbia, 1972, the court ruled that public education should be provided to all children with special needs. And not only was it supposed to be provided, but there is going to be an installation of due process safeguard. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibited discrimination against individuals with disabilities. The Education for All Handicaps Act was passed in 1975. This mandated that all children with disability had the right to a free, appropriate public education to ensure that students with special needs receive the services they need to be able to reach their academic goal, that they'll be able to have future career and live an independent life. President Ronald Reagan amended the act in 1986 and included early childhood education and intervention for children with special needs. The Board of Education of the Hendrick Hudson School District versus Rowley found it is here that the courts define free, appropriate public education. The Individual with Disability LGBT Act of 1990 renamed the Education for Handicapped Children Act. And it also included traumatic brain injury and autism, along with transitioning requirement for students on an IEP over the age of 16. No Child Left Behind of 2002, signed by President George W. Bush, the No Child Left Behind Act was reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, states to develop education standards and assessment of standards.